I never imagined it would end like this on my birthday of all days. I always thought that the person who would be there, who would make this day special, would be my son, the one I raised, the one I sacrificed everything for. But there I was, alone, surrounded by strangers in a sterile nursing home room. No cake, no calls, no cards. Just the sound of silence. I spent years of my life taking care of him. I worked long shifts, sacrificed my own dreams, and gave up every part of myself, all to make sure he had everything he needed. I thought it would be worth it. I thought that when he grew up, he'd appreciate everything I did for him. That one day, I'd be the most important person in his life. I believed that. I was wrong. I didn't expect him to turn his back on me like this. Not on my birthday. After everything, after all those sleepless nights, the extra shifts, the skipped meals to make sure he had a future, I never imagined he'd just leave me. I thought he would be the one to remember, the one to show up for me. But instead, he dropped me off at this nursing home. Just like that. I didn't ask for much. All I wanted was a simple acknowledgement, a smile, a call, a thank you for everything I did. But here I am in this room, alone on my birthday, wondering if he even remembers who I am anymore. My own son, my flesh and blood, didn't even look back. I never asked for much. All I wanted was for him to see me, to remember the years I gave him, the sacrifices I made. But now, it was like I didn't even exist. And what hurt the most was that I thought I had given everything for him. But somehow that wasn't enough. I watched as his car drove away, the exhaust smoke drifting behind him. His face never turned back. Just a brief wave, and then he was gone. Off to his own life. A life where I didn't seem to have a place anymore. There was a hollow feeling in my chest, one I had been carrying for years but had never really acknowledged until now. I had always been there in the background, always giving, always sacrificing, always waiting for the recognition that never came. But now it hit me like a wave. I was alone. I wasn't even part of his life anymore. And on my birthday, no less. I sat there in the nursing home, my heart heavy. I could hear the faint sounds of laughter coming from the hall, a family gathering in another room. It felt like the whole world was celebrating while I was left to sit in silence. The silence was deafening. It was as if I had faded away completely, leaving nothing behind but a memory that was no longer important. And then, as I sat there in my thoughts, I saw something that caught my eye. A small, crumpled piece of paper in the pocket of my son's jacket. A lottery ticket. It was wedged between the folds, almost hidden, like he didn't care enough to keep it safe. I picked it up absent-mindedly, still caught in the haze of disappointment. At first, it seemed like nothing. Just a scrap of paper, a forgotten detail in the chaos of everything else. But then I paused. Something about it intrigued me. I stared at it for a long time, as if it were holding a secret that I needed to uncover. Why would he leave it behind? Was it a mistake? Or was it something more? I didn't know, but I couldn't help but wonder if it was a sign. A twist of fate, maybe. I unfolded the ticket slowly, the edges crinkling. There was something almost absurd about it. A lottery ticket? After everything I had done for him, after all the years of sacrifice, was this my chance? Was this something that could finally change my life? I shook my head, not sure what to think. But then, as I sat there holding the ticket in my hand, I felt a flicker of something deep inside me. A feeling I hadn't felt in years. Power. For the first time, I wasn't just waiting for someone else to take care of me. I wasn't just a passive observer in my own life. The thought of the ticket gave me a strange sense of control, a reminder that maybe I didn't have to be invisible anymore. Maybe this was my moment. Maybe this wasn't just a lottery ticket. Maybe this was my chance to take back my life. I stared at it for a while longer. I had no idea what this ticket could bring. But in that moment, it felt like everything I had ever wanted was within reach. Not in the form of a child's love or recognition. Not in the form of a birthday greeting or a thank you note. But in my own hands, with my own power to choose what comes next. And as I held the ticket, I made a decision. I wasn't going to wait anymore. I wasn't going to be left in the shadows, forgotten. This was my time now. It was time for me to step into the light. For once, I was going to do something for myself. For the first time in years, I wasn't just a mother, a caregiver, a wife, a forgotten person. I was someone who mattered. I was someone who could choose what came next. And with that, I tucked the ticket into my pocket, feeling a surge of determination. The rest of the day passed in a blur, but in my mind, everything had shifted. I wasn't the woman who waited for her son to come back and say sorry. I was the woman who was about to take control of her own future. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. The days that followed felt like an eternity, but not in the way I had always imagined. The time seemed to stretch out, each minute heavier than the last, but I was no longer waiting for something to change. I had already made my decision. The ticket was the spark. It was a reminder of something I had forgotten, something I had let go of over the years, my own power. I couldn't stop thinking about it. That crumpled lottery ticket was sitting in my jacket pocket, a tiny piece of paper holding an enormous weight. Every time I reached for my purse or moved a little too quickly, I felt it pressing against my side, like a secret I couldn't ignore. What if I won? What would I do with all that money? The question lingered in my mind, and I couldn't shake it. The more I thought about it, the more I realized it wasn't just about the ticket. It wasn't about the money. It was about what that ticket represented, freedom. I'd spent my whole life giving to my son, my family, my marriage, my career, and in return, I had been left behind. I wasn't asking for riches, but I had been waiting for someone to recognize the worth in what I had done, the worth in who I was, and no one had. So, as I sat in that lonely room in the nursing home, with nothing but the sound of my thoughts and the hum of fluorescent lights above me, I knew this was my moment. I was going to claim it, regardless of whether or not the ticket had the big prize. That evening, when the nurse came in to check on me, I asked if I could borrow a coin. I didn't tell her why, didn't mention the ticket or what was at stake. She smiled kindly and handed me a coin, and I left the room to go to the quiet lounge down the hall. The building was practically empty, the stillness adding to the weight of everything that had been building in my mind. I sat down at a small wooden table by the window, and for a moment I just stared out into the parking lot, watching the distant streetlights flicker on. The world outside seemed so far away, but this moment, this ticket was mine. I didn't know what would come next, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a choice. I took the coin from my hand and slowly began to scratch the ticket. My heart raced with anticipation, not because I thought I would win, but because for the first time in years, I wasn't just watching life go by. I was doing something for me. As I scratched the numbers, the familiar dull thud of the coin against the paper filled the silence. The world outside faded away, and for those brief moments, I wasn't thinking about my son or the life I had lived up until now. I wasn't thinking about the years of sacrifice or the feeling of abandonment. The world was just me in this moment. When I finished scratching, I looked down at the ticket expecting to see a few small prizes, maybe just enough to make me feel like I'd won something. I never expected what I saw next. I blinked hard, rubbing my eyes to make sure I wasn't imagining it. But no, the numbers matched. The words appeared in bold, flashing across the ticket, jackpot winner. I couldn't breathe for a moment. My hands trembled as I held the ticket up to the light, almost as if I needed to confirm that it was real. It was real. I had won. The jackpot wasn't just a few $1,000s. It was a life-changing amount. More money than I could have ever imagined. But it wasn't the money that hit me hardest. It was the realization that in one moment everything had changed. I had been given the power to rewrite my story, to step out of the shadows and finally claim my place in the world. For so many years I had been invisible, just a mother, just a wife, just a caregiver. But now I was someone who had won. I wasn't just the woman who had lived her life for others. I was the woman who could choose what came next. I couldn't help but smile. It wasn't a smile of joy, not exactly. It was a smile of recognition, of empowerment. For so long, I had convinced myself that my worth was tied to my role in other people's lives. But now I saw clearly. My worth was mine alone. As I folded the ticket carefully, I knew I wasn't going to tell anyone right away. Not my son, not the nursing home staff, not anyone. This was mine. All mine. The next day, I called the lottery office and arranged to claim my prize. I made the call calmly, but inside my heart was pounding. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the control, the sense of self that I had been missing for so long. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I sat in the quiet lounge again. The jackpot win didn't feel real, but as I held the ticket, I felt something shift inside me. A sense of finality. I wasn't going to be ignored anymore. I wasn't going to wait for someone else to take care of me or to validate my existence. This was my time. I stood up, my hand steady, the ticket still clutched in my palm. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't afraid to move forward. The door to the lounge opened and a nurse came in to check on me, but I barely noticed her presence. I was too consumed by the possibilities ahead. I had never felt more alive. I was finally free. The days after I claimed the jackpot were a whirlwind, but not in the way I had expected. I had won, yes, but more than that, I had found something I thought I had lost, the confidence to believe in myself again. I was no longer the woman who lived in the shadows, waiting for the world to acknowledge her. I was someone who had taken control. But even now, as I held the winning ticket, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. The money, the freedom it promised, were incredible, but they weren't everything. The question still loomed in my mind. What do I do with all of this? What happens when the world finally recognizes you, but you're not sure who you are anymore? I spent days in the quiet of my room, contemplating everything. I could buy a new house, something small and cozy with a garden. I could travel, finally see the places I had always dreamed of. I could be free, but what would that look like? And more importantly, what would it mean for me? I decided to take some time to figure it out. The first thing I did was go to the bank to deposit the check. It was strange, standing in front of that counter, the reality of the situation settling in. The teller, a young woman who smiled politely at me, didn't know the weight of the ticket I was handing her. She didn't know that it was more than just money. It was my chance to finally be someone. After the deposit was made, I walked outside, the air fresh against my skin, but somehow still heavy with uncertainty. What was I going to do with all of this? For the first time in my life, I wasn't sure. I had always been so sure of my role, so used to doing for others. But this time, it was about me. It felt like a gift and a burden all at once. Later that day, I received a call from my son. His name flashed on my phone, and for a moment I hesitated. Should I answer? Should I tell him? Part of me wanted to hang up, to let him wonder where I was, what I was doing. After all, he had never truly cared about me, at least, not in the way I had hoped. But I answered, "Mom, where are you? I've been trying to reach you. Are you okay?" His voice sounded so distant, so unfamiliar. It wasn't the voice of the boy I had raised, the one who would run to me after a bad day at school or when he needed help with his homework. This was the voice of someone who hadn't really been a part of my life in years. "I'm fine," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've just been thinking a lot." "Thinking about what?" he asked. "You've been distant lately. Is something wrong?" I took a deep breath. There was a moment of silence between us, one that seemed to stretch on forever. He was waiting for me to speak, waiting for me to explain myself, but I wasn't ready to explain anything yet. Not to him. "I'm okay, Daniel," I said, finally breaking the silence. "I'm doing just fine." He didn't seem convinced. I could hear the concern in his voice, but there was something else there too. Guilt? Maybe, but it wasn't the kind of guilt that would make him change. It wasn't the kind of guilt that would make him come back to me. I don't know what happened," he said, his words trailing off. "I thought everything was fine between us. Everything was fine until it wasn't." I could feel the anger rising in me, but I swallowed it down. Now was not the time to confront him, not yet. "Everything's fine, Daniel," I said again, my voice firm. "I'll talk to you soon." I hung up the phone, and for a moment I just sat there. What had happened to us? Where had we gone wrong? I thought about all the years I spent raising him, all the sacrifices I made. And now here he was, acting like nothing had changed, like the years of silence between us hadn't even existed. But in that moment, I realized something. It didn't matter anymore. I didn't need his approval. I didn't need his validation. I had lived my life for him, for my family, for everyone else. But now, it was time for me to live for myself. I didn't need to chase after the love or recognition that had always been out of reach. I was enough on my own. The phone call with Daniel had been a wake-up call for me. I was no longer willing to let him or anyone define me. I had the power now. The power to make my own choices, to choose how I wanted to live the rest of my life. I didn't need to hold on to the past. I needed to let go of all the expectations, all the disappointments, and start fresh. The next morning, I made a decision. I wasn't going to waste another moment waiting for someone to tell me what to do. I wasn't going to sit idly by and let the years slip away. I had a future to create, and I was going to do it on my terms. I began by planning a trip just for me, a place I had always wanted to visit but had never had the chance to. No more waiting for permission. No more excuses. I was going to take control of my life, step by step. The money was just the beginning. The real prize was the freedom to choose my own path. As I sat down to make travel plans, I realized something else. This wasn't just about the money. This was about reclaiming my life, about not letting the past define who I was. I had spent so long living for others that I had forgotten how to live for myself. But now I remembered. Now I was ready. And I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. The days after I decided to reclaim my life were filled with change. I started making plans for the future, buying a few things I had never allowed myself before. A new pair of shoes, a few books I'd always wanted to read. Small things, but they felt monumental. I felt like I was rediscovering a part of me that had been buried for so long. It almost felt foreign. But despite the excitement of the new life I was building, I couldn't completely shake the feeling of unease. It was a quiet unease, but it was there, lurking beneath the surface. The money, the freedom, it was all mine now. But what did that mean for my relationship with Daniel? Could I ever truly let go of the years of sacrifice? And more importantly, could I walk away from the person I had been in his life? The phone call with Daniel still echoed in my mind. His voice, full of concern but tinged with guilt, had stirred something inside me. I knew he hadn't meant to hurt me, at least not in the way he did. But he had. The way he had dismissed me for so many years, the way he had let me fade into the background of his life. It hurt. And I had spent so much of my life trying to ignore that hurt, convincing myself that my love for him was enough to fill the void he created. But now, with the money and the newfound power I had, I couldn't ignore the truth anymore. The truth that I had spent far too long being invisible, far too long sacrificing my own happiness for the sake of others. Still, it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy to simply let go of everything I had believed about myself, everything I had believed about my role in this family. As much as I wanted to embrace my newfound freedom, I still longed for my son's approval. I still wanted him to understand me, to see all the years I had spent pouring myself into him. That evening, I sat alone in my room, the weight of my thoughts pressing down on me. I had spent years building a life around my son, building a life around being needed. But now, I wasn't sure where I fit in. Without the role of mother, without the constant demands from him, who was I? What was I really doing? I knew what I needed to do next, but it wasn't easy. I had been hiding from the truth for so long, and now I had to face it head on. I decided to write him a letter I knew would change everything. I wasn't going to beg him for attention anymore. I wasn't going to ask him to validate my existence. I was done with that. But I needed him to understand what had happened. I needed him to know that I wasn't just his mother. I was a person too. A person with dreams, with desires, with a future that didn't revolve around him. I sat at the desk, the pen in my hand. The words didn't come easily at first. How do you say something like this to your son? How do you explain that after everything, you've come to a point where you no longer need his approval to live your life? But as I wrote, the words began to flow. I wrote about the years of sacrifice, about the pain of being invisible in his life, about how I had allowed myself to become nothing more than the woman who cooked, cleaned, and made sure everything was okay for him. I wrote about how I had spent so long pouring my love into him, hoping that one day he would return that love in a way that made me feel seen. But I no longer needed that from him. I didn't need him to apologize. I didn't need him to suddenly wake up and realize what he had done. I finished the letter, folded it carefully, and placed it in an envelope. I stared at it for a long time, unsure of whether I was ready to send it. But in that moment, I realized something else. I wasn't doing this for him. I was doing it for me. I wasn't asking for his forgiveness or approval. I was simply telling him my truth. The next morning, I went to the post office. I didn't look back. I dropped the letter in the mailbox, and for the first time in my life, I felt a sense of peace. I had spoken my truth, and that was enough. I didn't know what would happen next, but I wasn't waiting around for him to fix things. I wasn't going to wait for him to make me feel whole again. That night, I sat at the table in my small apartment, the light of a single candle flickering in front of me. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the weight of my past decisions pressing down on me. I felt lighter, freer. The world outside my window seemed just a little bit brighter. I had finally done it. I had finally stopped waiting for someone else to give me permission to live. And as I sat there, taking in the stillness, I realized that I was no longer invisible. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. I didn't need anyone's approval. I didn't need anyone to tell me that I mattered. I mattered because I said I did. The phone rang later that evening. It was Daniel again. I let it ring for a moment, my heart beating a little faster. But I didn't answer. This time, I wasn't running to him. I wasn't trying to be what he wanted me to be. I was just living for myself, and that was enough. The weeks that followed the letter felt like a slow but steady reclamation of myself. The weight of the world didn't just lift overnight, but little by little, I began to see things differently. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about what I had been missing for so long, the ability to make choices, to choose for myself. It was the freedom to stop waiting for someone else to tell me who I was and what I should be doing with my life. At first, I focused on the small things. I took a walk every morning. I went to the coffee shop down the street and treated myself to a latte, something I had never done before. I didn't need a reason to celebrate. I didn't need an occasion. I just did it for me because I could. For the first time in years, I wasn't apologizing for taking up space. I wasn't trying to make others comfortable with my existence. I was simply living. I also started thinking about my future. Realistically, what did I want? Not what I thought I should want. Not what I had spent my life sacrificing for others. What did I need for myself? I began researching art classes. I had always wanted to learn how to paint, to let the colors flow onto the canvas like the emotions I had spent my life hiding. But every time I thought about it, I told myself I didn't have time, or money, or that I was too old to start something new. But that voice in my head, the voice that had always held me back, started to grow quieter. This time, I was choosing to make room for something just for me. I signed up for the first class I could find. It didn't matter if I was good at it. It didn't matter if I ever became a famous artist. What mattered was that I was doing something I loved, something that made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. The next week, I went to my first class. It was small, a cozy space with old wooden floors and sunlight streaming through the windows. The other students were younger, most of them in their 20s or early 30s, but none of that mattered. What mattered was that for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just watching life go by. I was a part of it. I felt nervous at first, unsure of myself, but as the weeks passed, I began to lose that self-doubt. I started to embrace the idea that it was okay to not have everything figured out. It was okay to be a beginner. The beauty of starting something new was that I didn't have to be perfect. I just had to show up. Meanwhile, the phone calls from Daniel kept coming. I didn't answer at first. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to pick up the phone and tell him everything. How I was doing, how I had finally found my own way. But there was a voice inside me that told me to hold back, to let him wonder, to let him see that I wasn't waiting for him anymore. Finally, one afternoon, I did pick up. The conversation was strained, awkward at first, like we were both trying to figure out where we stood with each other. "Mom, I got your letter," he said. His voice was quiet, uncertain. I didn't know what to say. I've been thinking a lot about everything. I didn't mean to hurt you. I don't know. Things got complicated. I listened, but inside I didn't feel the rush of emotion I used to. I didn't feel the desperation to fix everything. I wasn't looking for an apology. I wasn't looking for him to tell me that he understood. I just needed him to know that I was okay. I'm doing fine, Daniel, I said, my voice steady. I'm good. I've been busy with some new things. I've started painting. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him shifting, probably not sure what to say. But this time, I wasn't waiting for him to fill the silence. I wasn't waiting for him to tell me what to do. That's good, Mom. I'm glad you're doing something for yourself, he said, his voice sounding sincere, but distant. It wasn't the heartwarming apology I had always hoped for. It wasn't the big emotional breakthrough I had imagined. But it was enough. It was a step. A small step towards something new. For both of us. After we hung up, I felt a strange sense of peace. The world didn't change overnight. My relationship with Daniel wasn't fixed in a single conversation. But I was learning to stand on my own, to be proud of the person I was becoming. The next few weeks were filled with small victories. I finished my first painting, a simple landscape of a meadow with wildflowers. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. It was a symbol of everything I had fought for. The freedom to express myself, to be who I wanted to be, not who others expected me to be. I didn't need anyone's approval anymore. I had found my own worth. And in the process, I had discovered a power I never knew I had. And then, one evening, I received another call from Daniel. This time, I answered right away. I was thinking about what you said, he started. About you doing things for yourself. I guess I never really understood how much you sacrificed. I'm sorry, Mom, for everything. The apology was quiet, almost tentative, but it was enough. For the first time, I felt like we were both on the same page. I wasn't holding on to the past anymore. I wasn't waiting for him to apologize for all the years of neglect. But hearing him say it, hearing him acknowledge the pain, it felt like a step forward. I forgive you, Daniel, I said, my voice calm. But more importantly, I'm moving forward. For me, we talked a little longer, but it was different this time. I wasn't the woman waiting for validation. I wasn't looking for a reason to stay in the shadows. I was finally the woman who was taking control of her own life. As time passed, my life began to settle into a rhythm I had never known before. A peaceful rhythm. I woke up each morning with purpose, not just for the sake of others, but for myself. I began to see that I had the power to shape my days, to fill them with things that brought me joy, things that I had long pushed aside, thinking they weren't as important as the needs of others. I spent my mornings in the studio, painting. My art became my therapy, my way of expressing all the feelings I had locked away for years. I painted with abandon, no longer worried about whether it was good enough. It didn't matter. What mattered was that it was mine. But there were days when the quiet of my little apartment felt heavy, days when the loneliness crept in, when I thought about my son, my family, and the distance that had grown between us. I had spent so many years pouring myself into them, giving everything I had, that sometimes it felt hard to shake the feeling that I was still alone. I would be lying if I said I didn't miss him, miss the child I had raised, the little boy who once needed me. But I wasn't the same person anymore, and that truth was both painful and liberating. Then, one afternoon, I received a message from Daniel. It wasn't a phone call this time. It was a text. Short and simple. Mom, I'd like to see you. Can we talk? I stared at the message for a while, not knowing what to do with it. On one hand, I was proud of myself for getting to this point, the point where I wasn't desperate for his attention, where I didn't need him to validate my worth. But on the other hand, I wondered if this was my chance to rebuild the bridge between us, to truly connect with him again, not as the mother who had been forgotten, but as a woman who had lived her own life. I sat with the message for hours, my mind racing through all the possibilities. Maybe he had changed. Maybe he had seen the light. Maybe we could finally have the relationship I had always wanted. But I knew deep down that it couldn't be that simple. It wasn't just about him, though. It was about me. What did I want? Did I want to reconnect with him for the sake of closure? Or was I still hoping to fill a hole that couldn't be filled by anyone but myself? In the end, I decided to meet him. But this time, I wouldn't be the same woman who had walked into that nursing home, expecting my son to fill the gaps in my life. This time, I was meeting him as the woman I had become, the woman who knew her worth, who had chosen herself. We met at a cafe, a small, quiet place not far from where I lived. When I walked in, I saw him sitting at a table by the window, his back turned to the door. He looked different, older, more tired. His face was lined with stress, and his eyes, once so full of the bright, eager innocence of childhood, seemed tired, distant. But as soon as he saw me, he stood up quickly, a flicker of something, maybe regret, maybe something deeper, flashing in his eyes. "Mom," he said, his voice soft, "I'm glad you came." I sat down across from him, my heart racing. There was so much to say, but I wasn't sure where to begin. I had spent so many years trying to make him understand me, trying to get him to see everything I had done for him. But now, I realized that wasn't the point. The point was not to make him understand, but to make myself understand. "I'm glad you reached out, Daniel," I said, my voice steady. "I've been thinking about a lot of things. About us." He nodded slowly, looking down at the coffee cup in front of him. I could tell he was struggling to find the right words, but he wasn't rushing. He seemed to be waiting for me to speak first. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, too," I said after a moment. "About everything. About how I spent so much of my life doing things for everyone else. How I let myself get lost in it. And I think that's why I didn't recognize myself for a long time. I wasn't just your mom. I was a person, too. And I forgot that. I forgot who I was." His eyes met mine, and I could see something shift in them. Maybe it was the way I spoke, or maybe it was just the fact that I wasn't apologizing anymore. I wasn't begging for his love or approval. I had found something stronger, something that was just for me. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for everything, for not seeing that, for not being there. I was selfish. I thought about my life, and I didn't even consider how much you sacrificed for me." I nodded, not because I needed to hear those words, but because I knew they were important for him, for us. He had to see it for himself. He had to understand the impact of his actions, but more than that, he had to understand that I wasn't the same woman anymore. I wasn't the woman who would give everything for nothing in return. I appreciate that, Daniel. But I need you to understand something. I'm not waiting for you to fix things. I'm not waiting for you to make me feel whole again. I've done that for myself. He sat back in his chair, his brow furrowing slightly. I could see him processing my words. He was hearing them, really hearing them, in a way he never had before. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I don't think I ever told you that, but I am." The tears welled up in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I didn't need to cry anymore. I didn't need to be rescued. I was finally okay on my own. "I'm proud of you too, Daniel," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "And I think we've both learned something important, that we have to live our own lives on our own terms. We can't expect the other to fill the gaps. We have to do that ourselves." We sat in silence for a moment, and for the first time in years, it felt like we were on the same page. We didn't need to fix everything. We just needed to be honest with each other. And maybe that was enough. After that conversation with Daniel, I felt lighter. The air around me, which had once felt so heavy, was now filled with a strange sense of calm. I didn't expect miracles overnight, but for the first time, I understood that I was not responsible for fixing everything. The weight of responsibility that had defined my life for so long began to lift, piece by piece. I had started to let go, not just of the past, but of the need for constant validation. I had spent so much time waiting for someone to tell me that I mattered. But now I was telling myself. I was the one who got to decide what mattered in my life. With that clarity, I began to invest more time into myself. I took classes, learned new skills, and explored hobbies I had never considered before. I traveled to places I had always dreamed of but had never thought were practical. It wasn't about escaping my past. It was about expanding my future. I spent a weekend in the mountains, breathing in the crisp air, hiking paths that I had always been too busy to walk. The solitude was calming, and as I sat by a quiet lake, watching the light play off the water, I realized something important. I had been running my whole life, running from my fears, my disappointments, my loneliness. But now I was walking into my life, into the next chapter, and I was ready to live it on my own terms. I began to feel more confident, and that confidence wasn't just about what I was doing with my time. It was about who I was becoming. It was about feeling comfortable in my own skin without apologies, without justifying my worth to anyone. It was liberating. I kept in touch with Daniel, but not in the way I used to. We talked on the phone every now and then, but it was different now. There was no pressure. There were no expectations. He was living his life, and I was living mine. We were both doing the best we could, and for the first time, that was enough. And then one evening, several months after our last meeting, I received a package in the mail. It was from Daniel. I opened it slowly, not sure what to expect. Inside, wrapped carefully in tissue paper, was a small canvas. It wasn't a painting, it was something simpler, but it was clear it had been made with love. It was a painting of a tree, strong and full of life, with its branches reaching toward the sky. Beneath it, in small, delicate handwriting, were the words, "For Mom, who taught me how to grow." I held the painting in my hands for a long time, my eyes filling with tears. It wasn't about the tree or the painting itself. It was about the message. Daniel had finally seen me, not as just his mother, but as the woman I was, the one who had given him everything, but who had learned to live for herself. I placed the painting on the wall, right above my desk where I painted every day. It was a reminder of where I had come from, of the woman I was becoming, and of the love I had given and received. The next few months were filled with small but meaningful moments. I took a weekend trip to a seaside town, where I sat on the beach and watched the waves crash against the shore, feeling the pull of the ocean like a promise of more adventures to come. I traveled to a city I had always wanted to visit, walked through museums, and dined in small cafes, meeting people who reminded me that the world was much bigger than the life I had once known. I even started dating again, not because I needed someone, but because I wanted someone. The difference was clear to me now. I wasn't seeking approval. I wasn't hoping to be rescued. I was seeking connection on my own terms, and that made all the difference. It wasn't always easy. There were still moments when I thought about the past, about the things I had given up. But those moments became fewer. As I painted, as I traveled, as I built the life I had always wanted, those old feelings of being overlooked, of being left behind, faded into the background. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for someone to validate me. I wasn't living in the shadows. I was living for myself, fully and unapologetically. And in those moments, I realized that I had always been enough. I had always mattered. The months continued to unfold with surprising clarity, and as the days passed, I began to see myself in a light I had never known before. I had spent so long focusing on the past, on what I had sacrificed, on the things I had lost, that I had never fully allowed myself to embrace the beauty of starting anew. But now, with each new step I took, I realized something I had always known deep down. It was never too late to start over. I had spent years as a mother, as a wife, as a caregiver, as someone who had given every last ounce of herself to others, convinced that love and sacrifice were the only things that mattered. And for a time they were. But somewhere along the way, I had lost sight of who I was. I had forgotten that my own dreams, my own desires, mattered just as much as anyone else's. Now, every day felt like a gift, a chance to rediscover myself, a chance to embrace the woman I was becoming, not the one I had been told I should be. I was no longer bound by the limitations of my past, no longer held back by the expectations of others. It wasn't always easy, though. There were still moments of doubt, moments when I questioned whether I was being selfish or whether I was making the right decisions. But each time, I reminded myself of how far I had come. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. I was creating a life that felt true to who I was without apology. I had found a new sense of peace in the quiet moments. In the mornings, I sat on the balcony of my apartment, a cup of coffee in hand, watching the world slowly wake up around me. I no longer felt the need to fill every moment with noise or distractions. I could simply be with my thoughts. And for the first time in a long time, I felt content with just being. One afternoon, while I was in the studio working on a new piece, I received a call from Daniel. My heart skipped a beat as I saw his name flash on the screen. It had been a while since we had spoken, and I had to admit there was still a small part of me that was anxious about how our relationship would evolve. I hesitated for only a moment before answering. I wasn't the same woman who had anxiously awaited his calls, wondering if he would remember her. I was the woman who had finally taken control of her own life. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice sounding softer than usual. "I've been thinking a lot about you, about us, and I want to make things right." I smiled softly, surprised by how calm I felt. I wasn't sure what he meant by making things right, but I could tell that this was a different side of him, one that recognized that things couldn't go back to how they once were, but that he was willing to try. "I'm glad you're thinking about us," I replied. "But I want you to know, Daniel, that I'm not waiting for things to be fixed anymore. I'm not waiting for anyone to make me feel whole. I'm whole on my own." There was a brief silence, and I could almost feel him processing my words. "I know, Mom," he said quietly. "I think I understand now. I'm really proud of you. You've always been there for me, and I've taken that for granted. I don't want to do that anymore." I felt a warmth in my chest, a mix of relief and love. For so long, I had carried the weight of our relationship alone, hoping that one day he would understand. But now, I realized that understanding wasn't something I needed to wait for. I had already learned to understand myself, and that was enough. "I'm proud of you too, Daniel," I said, my voice steady. "And I'm glad you're doing the work to understand things. But just remember, my life is mine now. And I'm not looking for validation from anyone. I'm doing this for me." The conversation shifted, and we talked about small things, his work, my art, the weather, and everything in between. For the first time, it felt like a normal conversation. There was no resentment, no guilt. Just a mother and a son, talking about their lives without the weight of expectations or the burden of the past. When we said goodbye, I felt a sense of calm. The relationship wasn't perfect, and I didn't expect it to be. But it was different now. We were both living our lives, and that was all we could do. A few weeks later, Daniel invited me to a small gathering at his apartment. It was a casual dinner with a few of his friends, and he seemed eager to spend time with me. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I agreed to go. I had no illusions about what this meant for our relationship. I wasn't going there to fix anything or to prove my worth. I was going because I wanted to, because I was learning to embrace the moments that felt right for me, no one else. When I arrived, Daniel greeted me with a warm hug. He introduced me to his friends, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like an outsider. I wasn't the woman in the background, the one who had been forgotten. I was simply me, a woman who had lived, who had loved, who had grown. The evening was comfortable. We laughed, we shared stories, and we ate good food. There were no expectations. There was no pressure to be anyone other than ourselves. It felt like the start of something new, not just with Daniel, but with myself. As I drove home that night, I realized something important. I was finally living for me. I wasn't trying to fix the past or make up for what I had lost. I was accepting what had happened, and I was choosing to move forward one step at a time. The freedom I had gained wasn't just about the money or the opportunities it brought. It was about the freedom to finally choose myself. I looked at the stars through my windshield and smiled, knowing that whatever came next, I was ready. I had finally found the power within me to create the life I had always dreamed of, and I was no longer afraid to walk that path, even if it meant walking alone. It had been months since I had truly stepped into the life I was meant to live. And though the process had been long and at times painful, I was finally able to say, without hesitation, that I was at peace. The past no longer defined me. The choices I had made, the sacrifices I had given, the years spent waiting for something that would never come, none of it held power over me anymore. Every day, I woke up with a sense of possibility. I spent my mornings painting, my afternoons wandering through the city, soaking in the energy of the world around me. I didn't need to plan every minute every hour. I had learned that the best moments often came when you let go of the need for control. It wasn't just the art or the travels that brought me joy. It was the small things, the laughter of a stranger in a cafe, the smell of fresh rain on the sidewalk, the gentle hum of the world moving around me. I had learned to be present in the moment, to embrace the beauty of what was happening right here, right now. But there were still moments, late at night, when the house was quiet and the world felt like it had slowed down, when I would think about what I had lost. I would think about the years I had spent thinking that love was about sacrifice, about giving until I had nothing left. And in those moments, I had to remind myself of the most important lesson of all, that love wasn't about giving everything away. It was about choosing yourself, about filling your own cup so that you could share with others without depleting yourself in the process. I had finally learned how to love myself. One morning, after a long walk through the park, I returned home to find a letter waiting for me. The handwriting on the envelope was familiar, Daniel's. I had almost forgotten how long it had been since I had last received a letter from him. I hesitated for a moment, wondering what it could be. When I opened it, I saw that it wasn't a long letter. It was simple and to the point, but the words hit me harder than I expected. Mom, I know I've said this before, but I need you to hear me. I've been thinking about you a lot lately, about everything, and I want you to know that I see you. I see how strong you are. I see the woman you've become, and I'm proud of you. I don't think I've ever told you that enough. I'm sorry for all the years I took you for granted. You've always been there for me, and I want you to know I'm trying to be there for you now. I don't know what the future holds, but I hope we can continue to find our way forward. I love you. Always have. I sat down at the kitchen table, the letter still in my hands, and for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to cry. Not out of sadness, but out of relief. For so long, I had carried the weight of our relationship, waiting for him to see me, to acknowledge the sacrifices I had made. But this letter, this simple, honest letter, was all I needed. It wasn't perfect. Our relationship wasn't perfect. But in that moment, I realized something profound. I had spent so much of my life trying to make things right with him, trying to make him understand me. But the truth was, I had already made things right with myself. I had found peace in who I was, and that was enough. If he could come to understand that, then it would be a gift. But I wasn't waiting for it anymore. I wasn't waiting for anyone to fix me or validate me. I had done that for myself. The days after that letter were peaceful. Daniel and I began to talk more regularly, but it wasn't the frantic, desperate kind of communication we used to have. It wasn't about fixing the past or trying to fill in the gaps. It was about moving forward, together but separately. We were both learning how to live our own lives, but we were also learning how to support each other in ways that felt healthy and true. A few months later, Daniel invited me to a family gathering. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I knew I wasn't going there to be anyone's sidekick or background character. I was going as me, the woman I had become. When I arrived, Daniel greeted me with a warm hug. There were no awkward silences, no pretending to be someone I wasn't. I was just there, fully present, in a space that felt comfortable and genuine. We spent the evening laughing, talking, sharing stories. It was the kind of evening that reminded me of the simple joy of connection, the kind of joy I had almost forgotten was possible. As I looked around at the people I loved, at the life I had created for myself, I realized that this was it. This was the life I had always been meant to live. I wasn't waiting for anything to happen. I wasn't waiting for validation or recognition. I was living in the moment, fully and completely. And for the first time in my life, I was not just surviving. I was thriving. I had reclaimed my joy. I had learned to live for myself, and in doing so, I had found something far more valuable than any external approval. I had found my peace. As the years passed, I settled into a life I had never imagined for myself. A life full of new experiences, new passions, and most importantly, new ways of loving myself. The journey hadn't been easy, and there were still moments of doubt, but I had learned something invaluable along the way, that the power to shape my own life was always within me. I had simply needed to believe in it. I continued painting, each piece a reflection of the growth I had experienced. My art became my voice, the one I had spent so many years suppressing. Every brushstroke was a declaration of my independence, my freedom, and my refusal to be overlooked anymore. My small studio with its messy canvases and jars of paint became a sanctuary, a place where I could be unapologetically me. But life wasn't just about art or the time I spent on my own. It was about the relationships I had built, the people I had surrounded myself with, and the love I had learned to give, not from a place of need, but from a place of wholeness. Daniel and I continued to grow, though our relationship had evolved. It was no longer defined by past hurts or unresolved expectations. We had come to a place of mutual respect. We understood each other better now, not because we were trying to fix something, but because we had both taken the time to heal. We were building a relationship based on understanding, not obligation. And that's when I realized this wasn't just about surviving. It was about living. One evening, Daniel invited me to another family gathering. This time, there was no uncertainty, no apprehension. I was no longer walking into a room where I felt like an outsider. This time, I walked in as a whole person, someone who didn't need to prove her worth, someone who had already done the hard work of finding peace within herself. I walked into the room, and it was like I was seeing it for the first time. The faces around me were familiar, but this time, I wasn't seeing myself through their eyes. I wasn't the background character in their story. I was part of the story just as much as anyone else. I had learned that I didn't need to apologize for taking up space. I didn't need to hide my light or my worth. I was simply me, and that was enough. The evening was filled with laughter, music, and stories. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't holding my breath, waiting for someone to notice me. I didn't need them to. I knew who I was now. As the night wound down, Daniel pulled me aside. He looked at me, his eyes full of something I hadn't seen before. Pride, perhaps. Or maybe it was just the recognition that I had become the person I always was meant to be. "Mom," he said softly, "I just want you to know how proud I am of you. You've always been there for me, but now I see you. I see you as your own person. And that's something I'll never take for granted again." I smiled, the words warm and genuine, but I didn't need them to fill me. They didn't define me anymore. They were a gift, yes, but not the validation I had once craved. "I see you too, Daniel," I replied, "and I'm proud of you too." We stood there for a moment, side by side, just two people who had found their way back to each other in a new and healthier way. Not because we needed each other to complete us, but because we had both learned to live fully as individuals. As I left that night, the streets felt familiar, comforting. The world around me had changed in ways I couldn't explain, but one thing was certain. I was no longer the person who had spent years waiting for validation or approval. I was the woman who had found her own strength, her own worth, her own voice. And that, I realized, was the greatest gift of all. I didn't need anything more. I had everything I needed inside me, and I had finally learned to see it. I was no longer someone who lived for others. I was living for me, unapologetically, confidently, and with a heart full of gratitude for the woman I had become. I had found my place in the world, and it was right here within me. The journey of reclaiming oneself is never simple, but it is always worth it. This story is a testament to the power of self-love, the courage to break free from the past, and the strength to walk into a new future with open arms. The protagonist has discovered that true fulfillment comes from within, and it is only when we fully embrace our own worth that we can truly live the life we are meant to live. Her journey of self-discovery and empowerment has led her to a place of peace, not just with her son, but with herself. She is no longer the background character in her own life. She is the leading woman, living with purpose, joy, and a deep understanding of her own power. And in this, she has found the freedom she had always sought.